Hello, my name is Colonel Jerry Kobylski, and I'm a professor of mathematical sciences at West Point, which is the United States Military Academy at New York. Okay. I will also be joined by Colonel Diane, the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership. The picture you see in front of you is of West Point, and people often ask, why is it called West Point? If you look at how the Hudson River bends around the corner, it's actually a point, and it's on the west side of the river. I am pointing to that point, which is the West Point, and it is the narrowest part of the Hudson River, and it is at that point that George Washington, during the Revolutionary War, decided to have a chain drug across the river to inhibit the British from transporting supplies up and down the river. If you were to visit West Point, there's actually a piece of that chain that's right around where I'm pointing to right now. But that's not why we're here to talk today. We're here to talk about the challenge that we underwent, that we have been undergoing, and it's an interdisciplinary challenge. First thing I'd like to do is just emphasize why interdisciplinary. It's a different way of teaching curriculum. It's more interactive with students, more connecting between disciplines. And the reason for it, we decided that we needed to look into it, is, as you can see, today's learners have changed. And best practices in higher education are trying to keep up with these changes. We know that there's characteristics that we want in all of our graduates. And if you look at those four, you will find those goals in many colleges, institutions, plans and objectives and vision. And of course, there's some disappointing or surprising statistics. If you look at these statistics from Carl Fish and Scott McLeod from their Did You Know video, you could see that there's a good chance that we're teaching students who are not going to be working in the discipline in which we teach them. So it behooves us to help them understand a much broader context in learning. The second piece to the interdisciplinary challenge is picking a topic. One of the most important things we found is to find a topic that all disciplines can buy into, that are eager to accept the challenge of trying to solve a problem. Well, the problem we select is energy security, and that can be analyzed through so many different lenses and disciplines. And the reason we picked energy is, you can see, we've got some serious challenges with energy. Some data here in front of you. The first and foremost one that's of concern to all of us is the loss of life in the convoys that are needed to get the fuel and the water to the front where our troops are. And you can see the remaining numbers that I have. The fact that it takes 7 gallons of fuel just to transport a gallon of water or a gallon of fuel. And the number of batteries that our soldiers have to take out on a 72-hour mission, and the total cost. So, of course, this is in a wartime environment, what we've been going through for many years now. But on a daily basis, we have those back at our installation on our bases back in the United States. And to promote energy conservation, several installations are part of a pilot program within the Army, and that's the Net Zero pilot program, where West Point has been identified to be net zero by the year 2020, which means that by 2020, all of the energy we use, we must produce internally, and that is a tremendous challenge that we are working on. So we have the challenge with energy from the perspective of what we as an army need to do, both in the combat environment and in the garrison environment. And indeed, this is a multidiscipline troubled problem that is contested. The reason I say it's contested, but it's not a case where we can just tell people to stop using power. It's not as easy that we have to motivate this. And of course, it helps that the top of the leadership of the Army, in this case, Secretary McHugh, who is the Secretary of the Army, you can see his 10 top priorities, and number 10 is to develop effective energy solutions. And he goes on to explain in the paragraph some of the things that we need to be looking at to become more energy efficient. On the lower left is a picture of a forward operating base, and that is something that you might see in Afghanistan or Iraq or any other forward deployed area where we have a grouping of facilities where soldiers stay between those 72-hour missions. The upper left are the statistics I already showed you, and on the right are methods that we get the fuel and the water to the front. We chose this forward operating base as a venue to give problems to our cadets. The problems focused on some of the challenges that they might be seeing in their near future with their soldiers. And we also want to highlight that when we talk about energy security, it's not just electricity, it's not just heat, it's many diverse topics, so that when we speak with our fellow colleagues of different disciplines, we want to make sure they understand that there's so many different angles that we could look at this challenge that we have. Before I begin discussing some of the things we have done for this interdisciplinary challenge, it's important to first summarize what our academic program is, so you can see how it's the challenge is a part of that. First, every officer cadet graduates with a Bachelor of Science degree, and in addition to their courses that are within their major, they also have to take 30 core courses, and that's as of now. Certainly there are some cadets that validate some courses, but you can see it's a very strong general education, we call our core program. And on the bottom you can see it's in addition to military science and physical education. On the next slide, we have how the program's broken down by year. And you can see it's a busy schedule for the cadets. The reason I have history and foreign language highlighted is because those are the programs that haven't yet integrated, because we're still looking for possible ways to integrate them. But all the other courses you see have in some way been involved in the program. The program first began, which I'll show you a timeline, with our freshmen, and then moved on to the sophomores in the second year. And I also want to highlight here that everything that we have been doing has been voluntary. It hasn't been that we've been told by our higher leadership, you will do this. Every course that you see within the circle in black boldface is a volunteer that wanted to be a part of this effort. So I think we are having the same challenges that every school would see in trying to develop such a program. And you can see even our leaders have also volunteered to lead in this. And I think our number one challenge is the fact that we have to engage disciplines that we normally don't, break through the stovepipes that we currently have, and I think a lot of disciplines have at various institutions. You may be familiar with SENCER has several different ideals that they promote, and these are just a few of them. And what I've added are in red are the humanities that you see, and a few other things, to highlight that it's not just science that we are bringing together, different areas of science, but we also want to bring in a larger cross-section of the academic community. This timeline on the next slide kind of takes you through quickly where we've been. This actually started in September 2010, where we spent almost a year talking and learning, and we went to our first SENCER Summer Institute in August of 2011. You can see in March of 2011 is when West Point was identified in net zero. And we began with the class of 2016, our freshmen, in August of 2012. That took us through that year. And it was about a little bit through that year where we revised our academic goals. And as part of that revision, you see much more integration that you can see inside within these goals. The next milestone is when we again did the interdisciplinary experience with the class of 2017, but we also had the departing freshmen who became sophomores go through now a second interdisciplinary iteration, which involved all of the sophomore courses that you saw on a previous slide. All of this work has been helping us now with our curriculum revision, where we're looking at the entire structure of that core program. And we will this year now begin our third iteration. This is the last slide I'm going to show you before I hand off to my colleague. And that's how we started in the very beginning. There's a lot of fine writing there. I'm not going to go through, nor do I expect you to read it right now. But what I do want to say is the way it started is if you look at chemistry, that's chemistry with the red cross, and also math with the stars. What we first did was outlined everywhere in a 40-lesson course where chemistry, so if you look at all the red marks, felt they had an interdisciplinary connection on energy. And these X's maybe probably weren't there last year or the year before. They were what we call low-hanging fruit, areas where they can inject an energy example. So those in red were all the potential ones. And then the blue stars were right behind, we put where all the math applications were regarding energy. And then what we tried to do is connect, wherever we could, the red marks with the blue stars. One example of this is if you look at lesson 15, balancing chemical equations. And we'll talk more, I'll show you a little bit more of that on a later slide where it's discussed in math. And finally then what we had was 3 other courses looked at those connections, and they also then blended in where they could make connections. So you had a lot of different connections happening between courses throughout that semester of the freshman experience, first semester. So with that, I will pass the baton on to my colleague, Colonel Diane Ryan.
Hello, this is Diane Ryan, and I thank my colleague for all of the great explanation that he's provided for you so far. So on the last slide, you saw how we began by making the connections between math and chemistry, which is not too much of a leap. That's fairly intuitive to think about. It's important to have a background in math in order to translate that into chemistry and vice versa. And there's obviously lots of places where there's overlap between those disciplines and similarity of perspectives with slight variations. But what is not so intuitive are connections between, for example, math and English. So one of our initiatives or one of our charges was to look for the places across a wide variety of topics and subjects that students were taking and figure out where we could partner and where we could help students make those connections. One example of this was an assignment that was initially given early in the semester in a math course where they were given this essay prompt that you see over here on the left to ask them how important is math in meeting with this specific challenge and relating that to at least two other topics or two other disciplines that they were currently taking courses in. And then later on in the semester, they would take that essay and revise it in their English class. So all throughout their English class, they're also talking about the same kinds of ideas that they're having in their math class and their chemistry class, but looking at it from an English perspective and how they can communicate these ideas both orally and in writing. So that's just one example where we made a deliberate attempt to work across courses so that students would start making these connections in a very meaningful way. And over here on the right side of the screen, you see some of the topics that the English class dedicated in 7 lessons toward the end of the course that they called the energy block. So it wasn't necessary for them to spread out the discussion of energy across all 40 lessons. They decided to take a deliberate approach and do it in a concentrated fashion towards the end of the course. And that was their choice. And we encouraged each one of the course directors to approach how they wanted to deal with the subject matter in their own way, in a way that best supported their course objectives and their learning objectives. And this was one example how math started out talking about it at the beginning of the semester, and English helped to drive those points home. And students also were able to revisit their work from early on in the semester and revise it, make it stronger, and that would hopefully add to retention and underscore the importance of being a lifelong learner and constantly improving upon one's work and expanding ideas and so forth. So this block right here explains what English's goals were in terms of encouraging them the best way to revise their work and recognize the importance of what they had previously studied. Here's an example of chemistry and math and how they were given a problem that they were required to use both disciplines in solving. So work that they were doing in one class was relevant in the other class and so forth. You see in the red, these were the prompts they were given in the chemistry class, and then they were given similar work in their math class that was complementary. And then in their psychology class, they were asked, okay, how do you influence human behavior? And they were learning that even in these highly technical subjects or topics, the human behavior aspect is always going to be a consideration. So in this case, they were asked, how would they motivate someone who was not necessarily willing to conserve energy or had negative attitudes about energy security? So what did they learn in psychology that was going to contribute to the goals that they had established in their other courses? So kind of tying all of these different lessons together through the topic of human behavior. And this was all summed up in a capstone event that was graciously hosted by the chemistry course. So they dedicated a number of lessons that students worked on summing up and integrating all the work they had learned in all of their other courses, and they just were what we called the bill payers. And we were very appreciative for them dedicating those 4 lessons, but faculty from all of the various courses then collaborated, provided input into developing the prompt and the scenario, and then assisted with the grading. So you can see around the edges each of the courses and what they contributed to this central problem of fielding a new soldier power system, which happened to be a solar blanket type system that would power all of these various pieces of equipment. And it was important for us to establish relevance to their future careers. So in this case, it was things that a soldier downrange in Afghanistan needs to worry about. So that's providing context for them and real meaning that will impact their lives 3 years from now when they they see themselves in those leadership roles. Now, we built on this the following year at the end of their sophomore year in the physics course. And the physics course followed suit and offered to be the bill payer for allowing the time in the schedule to create another capstone type event. It was much less structured, which is why we call it a modest challenge. They weren't necessarily given specific constraints on how they should solve the problem. So they had a lot more latitude to incorporate these various classes that they were taking all at the same time over the course of the second year of studies, and to solve this central problem of recommending what is the best way to create power in the city of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Is it wind power? Is it water power? What's the best possible solution, incorporating a multidisciplinary perspective? So these comprise the outcomes of how they did in these individual courses, grades on specific events like the math and English combined essay that I talked about a few slides ago, the results of individual courses, and then the capstones that were executed in chemistry in the first year and physics in the second year are direct evidence of success in these courses. We also thought it was important to get some subjective analysis from both students and faculty, and to this end, we use the student assessment of learning gains that we deployed several times throughout this 2-year endeavor. The class that has been through 2 years of this initiative was surveyed at the beginning of their freshman year, in the middle of the freshman year, at the end of the freshman year, and then at the end of the sophomore year to determine what were their expectations going into this core curriculum, how confident were they with their skills and abilities in a number of dimensions, and then also measuring their interest and enthusiasm for the topic of energy. And then we asked them at each of those subsequent points, what gains did they think they had made as a result of the courses that they took. We also do the typical end-of-course evaluations that ask a lot about the teacher's instructional methods and the course materials, typical that you would see, and we are continuing to analyze all of those various data points to get a more comprehensive assessment of our efforts. So using the Student Assessment of Learning Gains, or the SALG study, we were able to track 200 students that from the class of 2016 who answered surveys at all 3 time periods: mid-year, during the plebe year, their freshman year, at the end of the freshman year, and the end of the sophomore year, to gauge where did we see the biggest gains in these 4 areas: their skills, their integration of their learning, their knowledge about energy and energy security, as well as their interest and enthusiasm for these topics. And what we've derived from our findings is that we think at the end of the first year of the intervention was where we saw the biggest gains. And this can be explained by the fact that perhaps at the middle of their first year, they really had a huge bump in metacognition and realized this is a fairly complex topic, and I wasn't as prepared as I initially thought I was going into this endeavor. And then as they became more comfortable and more confident in the second semester, we saw this big gain, and they did the capstone exercise and really increased their confidence. As that confidence grew and they felt more comfortable working with these complex problems, we saw the gain slightly decrease in the sophomore year, but this is okay because we know that this is additive. So we've actually made more confidence, So at the end of the sophomore year, we see smaller gains, but because this is additive, we know we've increased their confidence in their ability to work with these more complex problems and issues, as well as integrate their learning across a number of disciplines. So we've learned a lot through this last really 3-year endeavor, and we've had some great successes. We've been able to really drive home the importance of energy and energy security in their careers, as not only as future officers in the military, but as citizens. And we've underscored the importance of engagement and working on problems that impact the future and their responsibility as leaders for the nation. We've increased cadet confidence. We've seen this through both our subjective data and some of the qualitative feedback that we've gotten that we're continuing to analyze and hope to publish soon. Had significant positive feedback through a number of events that we've scheduled throughout the course of the endeavor. And we continue to find new connections with each iteration of each course. And we see where students are starting to have light bulb moments where they are presented a topic in one class and they are able to say, oh, I remember when Professor so-and-so in my psychology class was talking about how I can change behavior. Just one example. The silos are not just disintegrating at the student level, we're also seeing we're seeing lots more cross-fertilization across faculty and greater opportunities for collaboration. So before we started this initiative, our approaches were probably much more along departmental lines and parochial with regards to disciplines. Although we were very collegial, we didn't go to great lengths to collaborate with one another, and we now regularly collaborate with one another. This is a photograph of a recent meeting that we have on a regular basis. This is one example where we met to talk about where can we make more connections. And every time we have one of these meetings, we find more and more opportunities to do that. And with each opportunity, we are creating learning opportunities for our students. But it has not been all a bed of roses. We've had some challenges as well and been able to, through our assessment, identify some places where we can improve. We have a unique challenge in that our faculty, at least 1/3, transitions each year as we send our junior instructors back out into the military. And this creates a challenge for us that we have to be able to more quickly integrate them when we're doing their initial faculty development. So we know that we cannot lose that intellectual capital when our transitioning faculty leaves, when our incoming people from graduate school come in the door, we have to immediately start talking to them about these initiatives and kind of what our expectations are. So really this is about expectation management. And we probably need to look at maybe even starting while we have people in graduate school to prepare them for what they're about to face, because we know this is an ambitious project, it's a fast-moving project, and we cannot squander any of the time trying to convince people why it's important. We probably need to be a little more strategic in our planning as we've rapidly tried to capitalize on gains. Sometimes we don't fully realize opportunities that are right in front of us, so we need to be a little more deliberate in our planning as we move forward. We need to create better connections between the freshman year and the sophomore year and beyond. Even though we've broken down the silos within those core course year groups, so for example, all of the people who teach the freshmen are working closely together. All of the faculty that teach the sophomores are working closely together. We can improve how the freshman faculty and the sophomore faculty work together to build on the gains from one year to the next. And that will help us to better codify our student growth model, both across cohorts and on an individual level as well. What I've just tried to explain is how do we create a better connection at this point, and then after we've completed the crawl phase and we think we've completed the walk phase in the second year, and our next opportunity is to capture what are we doing beyond those first 2 years. And at this point, students are largely out of the core curriculum and they're working mostly within their majors and working on their senior year capstone projects. So how can we capture enthusiasm from the first 2 years of this program and build on those gains to further integrate their learning and really create something of value, both for the individual students as well as for the Army. So in the last 30 minutes or so, hopefully we have given you some ideas, shared with you some challenges and some great opportunities that we have. We know we're a unique institution, but we hope that we've encouraged you to maybe even take a few of these ideas and think about how you might implement them into your own programs, and any ideas that you might want to share with us about how we can be more successful in developing leaders of character for a future service to the nation, we would greatly welcome them. So thank you for your attention and have a great day.